Utopian nightmare where individual rights are not protected and a scared populace submits to a police state. They're not painting a very nice picture of Australia, I've got to say. Have a look.
There's little sympathy for anyone ignoring the health orders. Even this group of teenagers caught partying after dark at the bottom of the North Bondi Cliffs. Herded to higher ground by Polaire's spotlight and speaker, the 8 boys were placed in handcuffs and left to explain a $1,000 fine to mum.
681 penalty infringement notices issued in the last 24 hours. More than 400 of those notices were again for people being outside of their home without a reasonable excuse.
To us, a bunch of teenagers being handcuffed in the middle of the night and fined $1,000 each for the crime of meeting at a Sydney beach has become normal. But the rest of the world is looking at that footage, looking at that news coverage with abject horror.
It's getting harder and harder to hide if you're doing the wrong thing, especially in the construction industry, a crackdown following on from the recent shutdown. Workers sent home if their paperwork isn't in check.
It is a struggle, but it's it's just what has to be done. Like, nobody likes telling people to go home. They've all got families to feed.
Our cameras rolling on another random blitz in Marsden Park.
Authorising me under the Public Health Act.
Inspectors have asked these tradesmen to show proof of their QR check-in as well as identification and vaccination records. One of the men here is from Campsie and he doesn't have his documentation, so he's being sent home. He may lose a chunk of his pay too if officers follow through with a fine.
Both those clips were from the same Nine News report, and there was plenty more I could show you from that particular report. That clip has already got millions of views on social media, with people from Scandinavia to South America marvelling at what's happening in Australia. I mentioned top-rating Fox News anchor Tucker Carlson. Here was his latest report on Australia.
Well, here are the numbers. From mid-July until last week, the entire nation of Australia, that's 25 million people, has averaged about 1.5 COVID deaths per day out of 25 million people. And that has been enough to justify the end of Australia and totalitarianism. In one recent case, which really does say it all, authorities executed rescue dogs, shot the dogs to death to prevent Australian dog lovers from traveling to adopt the dogs. Leaving your home is no longer allowed. So they just killed the dogs. And the population put up with it. They were told they had to. Nightly news in Australia now looks like a science fiction film.
He wasn't done there. There's more, much more.
One Australian news outlet just reported, and we're quoting, "A tip to Crime Stoppers has blown the lid on a church service attended by 60 adults and children. The gathering has been described as selfish and arrogant," end quote, for going to church. So what else in Australia is now considered, quote, selfish and arrogant? It's not just going to church or leaving your apartment or trying to adopt a dog. Watching the sunset is also selfish and arrogant. Watch.
There's a whole bunch of people down the Ryback Beach last night who thought the best thing to do was to go and watch the sunset. I'm sure it was a beautiful sunset. But that's not in the spirit or in the letter of these rules.
Scolded for watching the sunset, executing rescue dogs, a nationwide manhunt for a guy who sneezed alone in an elevator. No one in Australia is laughing at this. No one can stand back far enough to see the lunacy on display. They're too far gone.
And then Tucker took aim at how our police force treat protesters. Now, these protesters have been maligned to the point of being dehumanised by much of the Australian media. But that's not how many overseas see it.
What did I... Someone get
If that were Iran, if that footage was shot in Tehran over the weekend, we'd all tug our chins and say, of course, the mullahs, they're not like us. But it's not Iran, it's not North Korea, it's Australia, what we thought was a rules-based society. What law did I break? You heard the protester ask as he's being beaten and handcuffed.
Then commentator Matt Walsh joined in the discussion, mocking Australia and what we have become.
When it comes to Australia, there is a sort of there's something poetic about seeing the country come full circle and back around to being a prison colony again, which is basically what it is there. And I think when we look at that, what we see, as you pointed out, that if the people will tolerate it, then the people in charge of the country will do it.
And that discussion continued. You might want to check it out yourself. Again, doesn't paint us in the best light. There's similar commentary and discussions I've seen from the UK. And this is not how we want to be perceived as a country. We don't want to be seen as scared, submissive and isolated from the world.
Are you ready to learn how to master the Forex market? Well, I'm going to show you how to potentially...
So, here we go. Lockdowns are the answer, are they? We're entering our third week. The cases increase. Am I missing something? If lockdowns work, why are the cases increasing? Or is Professor Woolhouse, a member of the Scientific Pandemic Influenza Group on Behaviour that advises the British government, is he right? Not chant. This bloke's a fair dinkum expert. He describes lockdowns as, quote, a panic measure. And he said, I believe history will say that trying to control COVID-19 through lockdown was a monumental mistake on a global scale. I never want to see national lockdowns again. I suspect right now, he said, more people are being harmed by the collateral effects of lockdown than by COVID-19. Unquote. I've repeated many times the Nobel Prize winner Michael Levitt, a biophysicist, a professor of structural biology at Stanford University. I think he'd know more than Dr. Chant or Berejiklian, describing lockdowns as a huge mistake. He argued, quote, the level of stupidity going on here is amazing, unquote. We need to remember Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers of America, who argued, are you listening, Gladys? Quote, those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety, unquote. It was months ago that Professor Sunetra Gupta, the Professor of Theoretical Epidemiology at Oxford University, urged Australia to, quote, abandon its selfish and self-congratulatory lockdown tactics. And check this graph. Sweden and the UK, the blue lines are the UK deaths during lockdown. That dip at the bottom there, that's summertime. The pink lines are Sweden. No masks, no lockdowns, fewer deaths. We're still not told whether, quote-unquote, cases are mild, whether they have comorbidities, how old they are. But Berejiklian's happy to chronicle one death, a 90-year-old woman. Did she die with it or from it? Nonetheless, the borders are closed, except Queensland, Victoria, South Australia, WA, but there are no cases outside Sydney. Yet look where we are now. Spare a thought for southwest Sydney. Where have we ever seen this stuff before? I said last week, and I'll say it again, Gladys Berejiklian has forfeited the right to lead and to be believed. There we have in southwest Sydney, Canterbury, Bankstown, Fairfield and Liverpool, people are shocked. 100 extra police, the dog squad, mounted police, even the police air wing, Polair. And what's the Premier say? I need everyone to be shocked. Can you believe this is Sydney or southwest Sydney? Horses' hooves pounding the pavement. And the people of Liverpool, Fairfield and Canterbury Bankstown are saying that when there was an outbreak at Bondi, we didn't see the dog squad, mounted police, highway patrol, Polair, the police transport command. But Gladys Berejiklian says she wants you to be shocked. Well, we sure as hell are shocked, but not the same shock you are talking about, Gladys. This is shock born of abject disgust. And then a further attack on our school children. They can't go to school. There's no evidence that they are at risk. But again, Berejiklian says face-to-face learning will return, quote, only when it's safe for the broader community. Where is the evidence? By tomorrow, there'll be 440,000 masks delivered to schools, 9 million by the end of the week. No international evidence exists that children should be wearing masks. I'll look at that later in the program. But according to official figures from the New South Wales Mental Health Commission, 1 in 10 New South Wales residents was diagnosed with a new mental health issue last year. Official figures. What will they be like after this latest defiant bullying by government? But Berejiklian and her handful of lapdogs are defiant. Desperate people are always defiant. They would care little for the comments of the Mental Health Commissioner, Catherine Lurie, that many of the mental health issues may linger for years. I defy anyone conducting these daily scare conferences to come onto this program and take questions about all of this. They won't, because they can't provide the answers. The rules are vague and contradictory. Shop only for essentials, but non-essential retailers are permitted to open. It's all in the name of health, but provide free beers as an incentive to be vaccinated. I repeat what I said last week about the flu epidemic in 2019. 20,000 in South Australia alone tested positive to the virus in 2019. 20,000. Were the borders slammed shut? Were people frightened witless? Were police stomping the streets? On one day alone in South Australia, 37 deaths were announced in 2019. As I said last week, that flu in 2019 claimed 750 lives in 6 months. There were no daily press conferences, no breathless reporting. Most of you can't remember it happened. How many do we have today in New South Wales? In the alarmism that's taken over, 112 cases out of 46,000 tests. Well, in 2019, New South Wales were averaging 826 infections a day. No instructions from anyone to search people's shopping bags or police making sure you didn't buy a non-essential item like shoes. No limit on how many could go to a wedding or a funeral or stand up and sit down in a pub, but of course you can't even go to a pub now. These people supposedly managing this so-called crisis are clueless know-alls with no understanding of history or the views of international experts. As Nick Cater from the Menzies Research Centre writes today, a survey of 1,000 Australians last week, this is amazing, by True North Poll asked people to estimate how many of the thousands of COVID-19 cases in Australia this year had resulted in death. The average estimate was 225. 21% of those surveyed estimated there were more than 500 deaths. Well done, politicians and health bureaucrats. Your fear campaign is winning. The correct answer was 0 if overseas cases are excluded. But now